Mr. Speaker, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, it's my honor and pleasure today to give you a little bit of information about a very special presentation we are about to enjoy. The state of Oklahoma, our Capitol building at one time was completely devoid of art. And over time, our state capitol has become the state capitol with the greatest art collection in the nation. The efforts of the late Representative and Senator Charles Ford, who's also a relative to one of our seated members here in the House of Representatives, helped establish these art gifts to the state capitol. Today, we are honored to welcome back to the House of Representatives one of our own members who served in this body for 12 years. And through his and his wife Cheryle's generosity and personal gift, a new piece of art will be commissioned for the state capitol. At this time, members, it is my honor to welcome back to the House of Representatives Representative Weldon Watson and his wife Cheryle to commission this piece of art.
Representative Watson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I think they are going to have a show and tell here, reveal the piece of art. Bob? Cheryle and I are delighted to be back in the House chamber today to present a piece of art for the Capitol. I spent 20 years out here, first as a reporter, then as a lobbyist, and later as a House member. I was out here almost 50 years ago, and since that time I've seen this place change considerably. It's changed quite a bit since I was sitting in the seat out here, as a matter of fact. And I never entered this building without a sense of awe for what happens here. I'm so very grateful for the beautiful artwork, as the speaker mentioned, that has been added in recent years. I'm also proud to say that I was supportive as a member of the House of the funding for the renovation that has gone on here for the last several years. I turned out in 2018, and today there are only 48 of you out of 101 who I had the privilege to serve with. I'm also a bit sad that my old friend, Senator Charlie Ford, is not here with us. Senator Ford passed away last year. He was my state representative when I was in high school in Tulsa. Years later, he was the state senator of my boys when they were in high school. My two boys are here up in the gallery. Boys, just wave up there. Senator Ford was a mentor in many ways and encouraged me to be an advocate for the historic preservation of the Capitol. Back in 2005, he gave me a book entitled The Art Treasures of the Oklahoma State Capitol, a book that depicted all of the art in the Capitol at that particular time. He was the founder and a great financial supporter of the State Senate Historical Preservation Fund, a fund that helped finance much of the recent art in the Capitol. And with us here today, as the speaker mentioned, is Senator Ford's nephew, Representative Ross Ford. Ross, it's good to see you today. I'm also grateful for the help and the support of Alan Atkinson with the Oklahoma Arts Council. I had no idea about how to commission a piece of art, and Alan met with me and provided the necessary guidance to proceed with this project. And Alan, wave up there. There's Alan up there. He arranged a lunch for Cheryle and I, introducing us to our artist, Mike Wimmer, and his wife. I was an admirer of Wimmer's artwork here in the Capitol, And when I got to know Mike, I discovered that he loves the state of Oklahoma every bit as much as I do. He's a native son who came from Muskogee, grew up in Muskogee. I spoke with Mike the other day, and he regrets that he could not be here today. He teaches art at an art institute in Savannah, Georgia, and is teaching classes today. But when I first met with Mike, he told me that I told him that we wanted to focus on the oil booms, that's plural, of the 1920s by honoring the Seminole Boom. During the 1920s, Oklahoma was the largest oil-producing state in America, and it remained so until the 1930s. Although there were oil booms prior to and afterwards, it was the decade of the 1920s that made Oklahoma a major oil-producing state. The Seminole Boom started in 1923 and continued into the 30s. Among the 1920 oil booms was the Oklahoma City oil boom. It started in 1928. The derrick out in front of the Capitol was called the Petunia Number 1 because it was drilled in a petunia patch. It was still producing oil from underneath this Capitol when I was out here as a reporter in the 1970s. Cheryle's grandparents lived south of here in a two-story house on 8th Street. When Cheryl's mother passed away in the 1990s, she was still receiving a small royalty check from wells drilled in the neighborhood just a few blocks from here. I told Michael Wimmer that my grandfather, whose name was Lee Watson, had been an oil field worker in the Seminole Boom, and that my dad had grown up in company camps in the area. Dad said that as a boy he could read a newspaper at midnight on the porch of one of those company houses because of all the natural gas that was being flared off. After relating stories about my dad, whose name was Bud Watson, and my grandfather, Mike asked me if I would provide a photograph of each of them so he could capture their likenesses on this canvas. And my grandfather is in the brown jacket, and my dad is in the overalls. The Seminole Boom was the last oil field to practice unbridled production prior to conservation reforms like proration and well spacing. If you notice in the painting, there's a multitude of derricks in the background. Also notice the lack of safety equipment for the workers. I believe it's important to note that this painting would not have been possible without Dr. Bob Blackburn. He provided Wimmer with historic perspective and photographs that made this project possible. Dr. Bob, as you all know, recently retired from the Oklahoma Historical Society. Bob, give a wave. And with Bob today is the current executive director of the Oklahoma Historical Society, Trait Thompson. And many of you knew him. It's obvious that many of you knew him as the project manager for the Oklahoma Capitol Restoration Project. Trait was also a constituent of mine many years ago and once asked me to come out and speak to a history class that he was teaching at Rogers State University. And I don't think we could have found a more perfect person to follow in the footsteps of Bob Blackburn than Trait Thompson. And I want to thank both of you for being here today. There are thousands of native Oklahomans like Cheryle and I who can identify with the oil booms of the 1920s. And I'll close by briefly telling you something about the two men in this painting. Oil booms are really very tough places to work and to grow up in. My grandfather was an abusive drunk in the early days of the boom, but fortunately, an old minister in Seminole named Burl Dodd, who I had the privilege to meet as a boy, sponsored a revival by two women evangelists, if you can imagine. They had a tent out on the side of Seminole. And somehow my grandparents ended up in front of one of those women who must have preached a hellfire and brimstone sermon. And both of my grandparents gave their hearts and lives to Jesus Christ. And as a result of that, of course, my 6 cousins and I grew up with unconditional, loving grandparents. I have 2 of my cousins up here. Vic, would you raise your hand? Vic is a retired public school teacher. And David Watson, he is a graduate of Seminole High School. Our Papa, as we called him, taught all of us to drive on lease roads. He spent 42 years with Sinclair Oil, most of those years as a pumper. As a boy, my dad learned every piece of equipment in the oil patch. It was a rough life, and unfortunately, he was blinded in one eye as a result of an accident when he was a little boy. And his first job was with Bethlehem Oil Field Supply Company in Duncan, in Representative McIntyre's district. And when they discovered that Dad was blind in one eye, he was fired because their insurance would not cover him. So he walked across the street, went to work for a little small oil field supply company owned by C.W. Cotton from Tulsa. Mr. Cotton convinced Dad to, in addition to his managing of the supply store, he also convinced him to start making calls on small oil companies in Duncan, Ardmore, later Oklahoma City. He finally moved Dad to Tulsa, and he began making calls on major oil companies, selling all kinds of oil field equipment. He called on Amoco in Chicago, Marathon in Findlay, Ohio, and of course, numerous major companies headquartered in Houston and Dallas. He even called on Boone Pickens in Amarillo. And later, the company was sold to Bovard Supply in Tulsa, and Dad retired as Vice President of Operations in 1986. One of his proudest moments was being responsible for the first barge of steel pipe to ever make its way up the Arkansas River navigation system to the port of Catoosa. I'm sad to say that I realize, as the speaker mentioned, because of the Capitol restoration, many of you have never seen art in this building during your time of service, and that's unfortunate. But thankfully, the art will soon return. Cheryle and I are proud to say that through this piece of art, future visitors to the Capitol, including those busloads of school children and native sons and daughters whose families were in the 1920 oil booms, as well as other visitors, those visitors will have the opportunity to get a visual glimpse of how Oklahoma became a premier oil and gas state. So thank you, Speaker McCall and Leader Eccles, for allowing us time to make this presentation. I'm also deeply grateful to the Arts Council for their help and support for this project. And with your permission, Madam Speaker, I would like to recognize Amber Sharples, Executive Director of the Oklahoma Arts Council.
By all means.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, for the opportunity to present this new painting for the People's House. Our gratitude to Representative Watson and Cheryle for your generosity in commissioning this work to the state of Oklahoma and to the people. The Oklahoma Arts Council was honored to advise and partner on this project, and we promise to be good stewards to preserve this work for generations to come. I would like to also welcome the Oklahoma Arts Council staff members, Alan Atkinson, Jericho Walsh, Joel Gavin, Kaylin Kinnaman, who are in the gallery for their expertise and contributions to this project. As the Speaker and Representative Watson mentioned, in the coming months, we will start beginning hundreds of the installation of works throughout our capital. This painting will be among the many new several works we are eager for people to see when they visit our historic building. We are excited to exhibit this painting, which will be in the ground floor west hallway, And this is where we will feature pre- and early statehood events, industries, and resources that have shaped our state, starting as early as 1860s to the early 1940s. We believe that this work will resonate with many Oklahomans with roots in the oil and gas industry, which remain today. We will also develop educational materials around hundreds of works of art, including this piece, and we will start to design docent tours for students and visitors alike to have an illuminating experience in Oklahoma history and better knowledge of art as well as Oklahoma. This painting helps to provide a more thorough experience and understanding deeply rooted in our strong ties to oil and gas, and we are grateful to add it to the collection. And we welcome members to come. We will have the piece in the House Lounge for the afternoon, so you can follow this presentation, or you come later, see it up close before we put it back in storage, before we bring it back out into the hallways in the coming months. Thank you so much.
Members, please recognize this amazing event.